Well, hey there team, welcome back to the channel and welcome to my overview of Menace from the Deep. So for those who want to cross it, I do overviews on this channel. It's where I have a look at the first 2 hours of a game. That's the Steam refund window. Steam says that you can make up your mind about whether you want to keep a game or not in that time. And broadly speaking, as a rule, I would agree. And so that 20 hours in, you're probably not going to change your mind about how you felt 2 hours in. So it's a short, punchy video, broad strokes, info, keep it around 10 minutes, and then you can make up your mind on your own. Okay, so, mixed feelings going into this. As you can see from the art, name, everything like that, this is very much a Cthulhu-inspired game, which is an easy hook for me. I'm a sucker for that, and I'll try just about anything that dabbles in Lovecraft and eldritch horror and so on. And as far as that end of this game, it's fantastic. But I'll be perfectly honest, another card battler, roguelike bloody thing. Jesus, you know, it is fascinating as much as we have a lot of hope for the indie industry rising from the ashes of the game industry, how they do like to repeat similar mistakes of the AAA industry. Like just absolutely fatiguing and wearing out an entire genre, which would be these roguelike deck builder type games. It reminds me of the previous generations when everything was grey like Gears of War and we had a million zombies in World War II games. So that was my thought going in. Alright, I'll give it a go. Cthulhu looks great. Card mechanics, sure. What's the verdict? It's fine. It's not bad, not at all. Well, apart from one sort of glaring thing, but mechanically everything's sound. It's taken some bits and pieces from different games. It's got a bit more of a narrative bent, which is good. That should be encouraged, embraced. However, it's kind of dry, to be honest. I was thinking about it, the dialogue and all that. The voice acting is a bit hammy, but I wouldn't necessarily call it bad. And the writing, like, it's not bad in the sense of what bad means these days, like objectively, horrifyingly disgusting. It's more bad that it's kind of just flat. That's probably the best word to describe it. I guess it strays a bit more towards info dump. Yeah, it's difficult, you know, and I'm not trying to pick the game apart. I'm just trying to find the correct words to describe the vibe. Narratively, it unfolds by having this cast of characters that you're not really involved. You're just like their sort of foot trooper going out and doing runs, and then between those missions, they'll wall of text each other with kind of exposition dump. But in the scheme of exposition dump, it's not terrible. And like I said, the acting and all that is quite animated and cool. But yeah, I think maybe it's just moving too slow for the amount of, you know, words per minute it wants to use. But otherwise, like all the art, I quite like the music, some catchy little earworms, kind of industrial meets horror, bloody, you know, kind of Carpenter-esque sort of chimey, or not quite churchy sort of music, but it's really good. And mechanically, it's solid. We've seen this before. And it's taken some interesting stuff from other games that we've checked out. One that jumps out is, I think it was from Realms of Ruin, that sort of furry Robin Hood type one where you pick from cards to progress along, which is nice to see, as opposed to the tried and true, dare I say, worn out Slay the Spire-esque, just pick branching paths. This is more like there's 3 stacks of cards, it previews what's on the top of each one. You pick that card and that dictates the encounter. Functionally, it's not that different, but it's, you know, it's different enough to add a bit of variety. But mechanically, it's everything that you've seen before. Like I said, not necessarily a bad thing, but derivative perhaps? You know, the block attack, I guess what it's doing differently in its own way, but I don't think it's really high impact enough to write home about, is if you play like multiple attack cards in a row, you will generate like a combo system which will stack up a bit more damage or a multiplier behind them. Same as block cards in a row. However, that sort of sequencing doesn't really, like, it's more like that was a cool idea and they thought, oh, that sounds different, let's put that in. As opposed to, does it really add to the game? Is it much of a multiplier or a synergy component? And I would argue no, because you get your random hand of cards and it's all tied to a build. Like, for example, in this, you have some preset starter builds going in with the starter character. Aggressive deck and defensive deck, which, you know, we've seen this sort of thing before. The aggressive is all out, just straight attack. The defensive one is more about building shields and that sort of thing. But my point is that that's going to dictate how you attempt to build your deck. But part of the cool hook about these sort of games is that there is a random element mixed through it, and you're making do with what you've got. So I don't think you really have a huge amount of time to consider combo interplay of, I'm going to try and play lots of attacks to get that multiplier. It's more like a little bit of sprinkling on the top. It's a cool little bonus that you're not going to remember or factor into anything really relevant, from deck building to sort of moment-to-moment gameplay. It does have another mechanic where you can sort of convert shields in some cases to like an overkill damage bonus, and if you take damage before you cash that out, you lose it all. So that's kind of cool, a bit of a risk reward. But again, its functionality seems more to make something like taking 10,000 block a turn, like a defensive only build, actually viable. But it creates for a bit of a tedium turtling experience. Now, this isn't necessarily unique to this game. This can be the nature if you make a deck that way in a lot of these games. But that sort of leads into the real major issue with this game, is its outsourcing of roguelite progression is egregious. And this is a real pet peeve of mine. It comes up occasionally. One game I like to bring up often is The Last Spell. Same sort of thing, I guess. Like, in many ways, really wonderful, beautiful art, music, interesting mechanics in that game's particular case. But again, that to me is the poster boy example of overkill of roguelite mechanics. Now, what do I mean by this? Okay, Soldiers 5 real quick. A roguelike is the traditional one, where you can just press go, and the entire game is contained within that run. This is all derived from the old game Rogue. And so the idea is you have infinite fun, infinite replayability, but you don't have this meta progression. When your character dies, you lose everything, you restart, and you just be satisfied with what happened in that run. But the more modern audience kind of demands incremental achievement feedback. I'm not necessarily being critical, I'm just calling the play on the ground as I see it. And so that's why you see, and maybe some of you younger guys or people that are newer to the genre over the years, you might even have come to think of this as normal. The idea that you'll do a run, you'll get so far, you'll die, but then to soften the blow, you'll get, now you're going to find these weapons in the run from now on. Or maybe you get a 10% strength increase across your account, so it goes a bit better. The problem with that is it puts the difficulty ramp back to front. The game kind of starts impossible in many ways. The harder you outsource it, like if you say 90% of the cards that are available to you in this game, we're going to withhold until you grind for 5 hours and die over half a dozen runs, and then we give you those cards. That to me, when you say that out loud, put it on paper, whatever you want to call it, that's wasting your time intentionally. It is a mechanic designed to milk you. And I'm all for finding a happy medium. I don't hate roguelites, but it really kind of grinds my gears when they do it to that extreme degree. And that's what's going on here. You've got your starter cards, you've got hardly anything, and then when you do pick a new card at certain points, it comes from an incredibly shallow pool. So you have to play through, you mix this with the bit more of a sort of elongated / tedious gameplay pace. I ended up on the boss of one of my runs, and I ran out of gas actually and died just before I was about to put in the final blow. But that whole fight took like 20-25 minutes of just stacking up armor, kind of waiting for the enemy to wear himself out and then try and chip in, and then he'd just heal most of it anyway. So like the pace, it doesn't really work quite so well. And that mixed in with aggressive roguelitification of meta progression creates, like I said, something that's functionally on paper very solid and has great inspirations, great art, great music, all that sort of stuff. But my God, if it doesn't feel like it's intentionally designed in many ways to stretch the game and waste your time. Now, having said all that, I live for introspection. I like to be wrong, and this could just be a healthy dollop of bias. I am an older gamer. I know what it used to be like as opposed to just roguelites, because that's pretty much it. 90% of them are roguelites, and it just depends how light it goes. So maybe you enjoy this. Maybe you kind of skew more to that zone out, grind, wind down kind of game. And the idea of just playing this for dozens of hours while it very slowly, incrementally gives you feedback and upgrades and all that, and eventually beat it. Basically, when the game's decided you've paid your penance and played enough to be able to progress. And look, that came with a bit of a snark angle to it. I don't really mean that. But by all means, if you do prefer a bit more of a mindless grind, and I say that with love, because everyone wants their downtime and they want it their way, then maybe you would really enjoy this. But if you do sit in my space where you're kind of at wit's end a little bit with the tedium of elongated, bloated gameplay loops, it's not just here in the roguelite space, it happens everywhere. Main reason why I don't play MMOs, because I feel like a lot of them stretch their thin gameplay loop to kind of increase runtime and justify being a live service type game. But yeah, if you feel that way as well, you might want to pass on this and check something else out, like Knock on the Coffin Lid. There you go. I'll offer solutions as well as criticisms. That was brilliant, and that was very much, I just want to load it straight up again. And it still had meta progression, story progression, all that sort of stuff, but it was infinitely more balanced. Not a terrible game, but be informed and make sure that that sort of loop and the length of it is within your palate. All right, team, might just leave it there for the time being, and I'll catch you guys on the next one.